Hello. Let's start. Welcome guys in our third lecture in our series Research 101. So, up tak we have discussed why should we do research, and then we discuss about how do we actually find a paper and how do we read it. And in this lecture, we actually begin. You know, we begin with how do we actually do it. Up tak we were learning how to interpret it. We are now from here we start how do we actually do it. So let's begin. One second. Keyboard work नहीं कर रहा है. Keyboard work. Okay. So in this session, इसके बाद you should all be able to form your own hypothesis that we'll discuss, and also you should be able to evaluate the quality of your hypothesis, and then we'll discuss how do we actually what are the various types of hypothesis that we will understand, and at last you should be able to identify what a well-formed hypothesis actually is, right? So when we begin with it, so something that you need to understand is the scientific method. What is, how do we operate? How do we, what is the basic scaffold when we actually conduct research? What are the steps behind it? So there's a very good comic panel to understand it. I've taken this from Khan Academy. So everything starts with the observation. Now, let's just suppose you simply observe my toaster isn't working. This is your observation. When this observation triggers a thought, triggers a question. Okay, why would my toaster not work? You're curious about it. Why is my toaster not working? And once you wonder about it, why it's not working, you try to come up with an answer. Now there can be many reasons why is your toaster not working. So you just come up with the most probable answer. Maybe the socket is broken. Maybe the outlet is broken. This is what the hypothesis is. You made a guess. Then based on this guess, you make a prediction. Okay, um, because the outlet is not working, if I plug my toaster into some other outlet, then the toaster should work, and which is a solution to your problem based on your hypothesis. So what we need to do is now, once we have made a hypothesis and made a prediction, we need to check if the prediction is actually working or not. So to test the prediction, what we simply do is हमने toaster लिया and we put it into another outlet. So यहाँ ये करने के बाद we have two outcomes, that either the toaster can start working or it may not work. If it actually works, if the toaster works, this means your hypothesis was correct. आपने, it was in fact that the outlet was broken. That is why the toaster wasn't working. And so, if it turns out to be correct, the next step would be go on probing about how exactly was the outlet broken, क्या हो सकता है, was it a rat, was it some other issue. But in case your toaster still does not work, this means your hypothesis was actually not right. Toaster wasn't working not because the outlet was broken. There was some other problem. So isme what would the next step would be? Okay, if this not good, then the reason must be something else. And based on this information, you will make a new hypothesis. So this is basically a good way to understand scientific method. So इसी चीज का this is a flow chart to understand this. We start with asking a question. Why was my toaster not working? And we do some background research, to form a better question. So once we have a question, we construct a hypothesis. Hypothesis, abhi ke liye just understand, it's basically just a guess. Then to test a hypothesis, you need an experiment. So you test that hypothesis with an experiment. Now that experiment could be correct. That experiment could be working, and if the experiment that you have designed to test your hypothesis, if there is some fault in it, you troubleshoot it, you correct the experiment, and when the experiment is actually working, then when it works, you get some data with it. जब hypothesis आप बना लोगे and when you test it, तो कोई ना कोई इसका एक result आएगा ना, you get some sort of data. So when you analyze this data, you draw some conclusions from it. Either the results will be uh, what you thought about in the hypothesis, या तो it will agree with it, या तो it will not agree with it. In either case, चाहे आपका result agree करे चाहे ना करे, you have to report it in the results. What next step is, अगर agree करता है, you can think of better things. But अगर नहीं agree करता है, तो based on this particular research becomes the background data for a new research. कि okay, this thing did not work. So based on this information, I might conduct a new research. So this is a basic, a skeleton of how we go about conducting a research. So, अब actually आते हैं what exactly is a hypothesis. So, if you just break down the word, hypo means less, and thesis is a theory. So, hypothesis is basically something that is less certain than a thesis. It's simply an educated guess about a research question. You get a research question and you try to figure out, you try to guess what exactly might be the reason. That is what hypothesis is. So if we have to define it, so it's, it says tentative or working proposition, which I'll tell later what exactly is a tentative or working proposition, suggested as a solution to a problem. Problem is a research question or to identify the unknown based on available evidence. Available evidence is the background research जो आपने किया था after getting uh, after having a research question, which the researcher seeks to provide to his study via empirical methods. This is very important because चाहे जो hypothesis हो, that hypothesis has to be tested ना, या either your hypothesis will be true or it would not be true. तो पता कैसे चलेगा? You have to test the hypothesis. So this is what so there are certain empirical methods to test a hypothesis, which is a topic for different lecture. वो यहाँ पे नहीं, तो this is what it. So how important testing is for a hypothesis. This was very beautifully put by a very eminent scientist, Richard Feynman. I think you may know him, you may not know him. He's one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists. So in his lecture, even he says, what is the key to science? So it says, if it disagrees with the experiment, it is the hypothesis or the guess. If the hypothesis disagrees with the experiment, it's wrong. In that simple statement is the key to science. It does not make any difference how beautiful your guess is. It does not matter how smart you are, who made the guess, or what his name is. If it disagrees with the experiment, it is wrong. That is all there is to it, right? So that is the importance of testing your hypothesis. So अब आते हैं कि how do we actually generate a hypothesis? So first is ये ideas कहाँ से आते हैं? How do we actually get a research question? So one of the major ways is you could get it from personal observation or intuition. That is majorly we get the ideas from. There are many things we are curious about how you on a daily basis. We observe everything. We observe each other. We observe different phenomena. In fact, as medical students, we go to postings and we just see in the clinics. We see so many patients and everything triggers some sort of thoughts in it. You observe something and everything triggers some sort of question. Maybe why is this happening? Maybe I can uh, I can come up with something or something, or simply it could come from your intuition. It's my gut feeling that this thing is related to this. Then another major resource is your medical literature. Your books are uh, full of information. Once what you go through it, you generate a lot of ideas. Also, all the research papers that you read online, say online or in the magazines, and wherever you read a research paper or your own textbook or some other textbook, that is one of the ways यहाँ से ideas आते हैं. And many textbooks even leave open-ended questions like all of you know कि Guyton is famous for कि it does not after explaining everything last में it says कि the exact cause is not known. So that is a a good way to start. Just open up Guyton and highlight जहाँ जहाँ उसने कहा है कि the exact cause is not known. That all of that is an idea for doing research. Then it can also come from scientific discussions. The discussions you have among your batchmates, from your seniors, juniors, in fact, from the teachers, discussions you have from the teachers or from the doctors, from the scientists, from from videos, from educational videos, any sort of scientific discussion could trigger an idea. And last but not the least, your own previous research, like if your hypothesis initially failed, remember, if your hypothesis does not agree with if your result does not agree with the hypothesis, you use that as a background information. So your own previous research can also serve as an idea for research. So how do we actually think of the right idea? How we start is first what you have to do is you have to find a broad area of interest or topic. Right? Like you have एक मोटा मोटा idea you have to get, if you say it that way. Like there are two ways to start. You can either start with a subject, let's say obstetrics, pediatrics, biochemistry, pharmacology. You can choose कि हाँ मैं जो भी करूँगा I will do it in this particular subject. Now the subject is in itself is very broad. There are so many topics, but you have to start somewhere. So you start with a broad subject. इस subject में करना है. Or you could start with a topic like autonomic nervous system. नहीं you feel कि मुझे जो भी करना है I will do in autonomic nervous system. अब autonomic nervous system में you can do something in its physiology, in its pharmacology, medicine, neurology, even neurosurgery. So these are two ways. Either find first या तो find a subject जिसमें करना है or find a topic जिसमें interest है. Next, what you have to do is just to read about and around that topic to identify gaps and new ideas. No matter how much you know about it, पहली बात you cannot know enough about it. So you will always have to read about कुछ भी आया, like even if it's ANS, अगर ANS में तो first go back to your textbooks and read about it कि ANS में क्या क्या चीजें होती हैं. Learn about the sympathetic system, learn about the parasympathetic system, the neurotransmitters and this. वहां से that's the reason for doing it helps you narrow down the idea. Now once you start reading in the books and online, once you start narrowing down the idea, so you can narrow down in these ways. You can do something related to the diagnosis of the disease, to the etiology of the disease, to the technique, to the treatment. You can go any way. There are n number of ways in which you can narrow down a topic. Also, while narrowing down, make it make it sure that whatever you are going जिस तरफ भी आप जा रहे हो, make it sure that that thing is important. there's uh, there's a huge amount of things जिन पे research हो सकती है. Make sure whatever you're doing is important and relevant to the medical science. It's interesting, it's something new, it extends the knowledge of humanity and it solves the problem. This I will discuss later too in the further slides. So you finally have some sort of narrowed idea, then you you do the literature search again. You again go back, particularly uh, particularly to PubMed, and now you search only a very specific stuff. You the way मैंने बताया था how do we actually search for papers. Now you start searching things that are related to just your narrow topic and not that broad area. And also इसी time पे you talk to the faculty and other experts. So that is a general way. So once you have formulated a tentative research question, the next step is to evaluate its suitability, which is done to final criteria, which I will discuss in a few minutes. And after that, we make the research question very specific, which is done through PICO criteria. So before that, a few points about your tentative research question. How do we actually go about it? So first, जब you have narrowed down the idea, you have अपने मन में ही state the question in your own words. Frame a proper sentence, state it in your own words. Once you've done that, you have to write it down, completely word by word in the best way, write it down. And which is very important because once the question is in front of you, you get better ideas how to modify it. And remember, it's never जो idea first time पे आता है, that is never the final form. You have to make a lot of corrections and writing down is important. And after that, you divide मन में ही divide into 2-3 basic concepts, which helps in evaluation, जो कि अभी हम कुछ देर में discuss करेंगे what evaluation is. So we come to how do we evaluate its suitability by the final criteria. So we have this final criteria. What exactly is? For any hypothesis, Once you have written it down, you have to subject it to this final criteria. So first of all, F, the research question you have written down, it has to be feasible. Is that question, whatever you want to do, whatever you have hypothesized, whatever your research question is that practically possible or not? Like many of us as medical students want to cure cancer, and let's just say there's some you want to invent discover a drug for which cures some sort of cancer. Let's just say prostate cancer. But is it possible? Do you know how to design a drug? Do you have the knowledge to do it? So if you frame a question that wants to design a drug, so that would not be feasible. Similarly, if your research involves doing some sort of procedure on a patient for 5 to 8 hours, is that feasible? No, because you as a medical student do not have 5 to 8 hours daily, right? So feasibility is important है ना. What are other things जो feasibility के अंदर आती हैं कि is my research question measurable? What type of information do I need? No, whatever you want to measure, it has to be measurable. Or another thing you can ask is my research question researchable? Like, can it be done within the given time frame? Na, research के लिए you have to define a very limit. You have to predefine कितने time में करना है. No, like so you cannot take a study which goes on for 10 years. No, 10 years you won't be in this college. So, and particularly even for 2 or 3 years, usually we have to keep study which lasts for certain months क्योंकि उससे ज़्यादा time नहीं मिल पाता एक study के लिए. And also, are those resources available at my college? Then comes interesting. As said, there are a huge amount of things, n number of things that you can research about, but not everything is interesting. Whatever you are coming up with, you have to make sure that is something that interests you, and also it interests the other people. It arouses the interest of other researchers and other medical professionals. It has to be interesting. So one thing that you can ask yourself is my research question something that I'm curious about, or is it something that others might care about? The next comes in the final criteria is novel. Your research question has to be something new. Like there is such huge amount of research available. You go on net and just check on the result. Billions of papers. There's already a lot of data available. So whatever you're doing, please try it's something new. Let's just say, just for the sake of research, you decide you want to find out the prevalence of diabetes in Etawah. What's the point? All of us already know the prevalence of diabetes. It's already in your textbooks. There's no point in repeating it just for the sake of it. If you want, it's the quality that matters, not the quantity. So आप इस टाइप की 10 non-novel research कर लो, there's no point. But a single novel research creates a big impact. So always focus on novelty. Ask yourself, okay, does my research question put a new spin on an old issue? Or does it try to solve a problem? Then a very important is your research has to be ethical. You cannot cross the boundary of ethics, particularly in research, and the rules are very stringent. Very strict rules. You cannot cross the boundary of ethics. Let's just say you want to see the effect of snake poison in a man, and basically you decide you will inject snake poison in people. Yes, it's a feasible thing. It's interesting. It might be novel, but is it ethical? No, absolutely not. Right? It's not ethical to inject venom in someone. So this is an important criteria. And last, we come to it has to be relevant. It has to be relevant to medical science. It has you can do in anything, but as medical students, I'm telling, and and it has to be relevant to. It has to add to the information that already exists. Right? That is what relevance is. So once we are done with well, what we first do, we wrote down the initial research question. Then we evaluated it. Does it fit the final criteria? Is it feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, and relevant? Then after that, we have to make the research question more specific. How do we do that? For that, we have the PICO criteria. So what does it stand for? P stand for population. That is the type of, what this means is what PICO actually is once you have a research, once you have a research question, you have to, you have to know what exactly you would be doing in your research. So this is what PICO helps with. Like P is population, the type of people. Whatever your research is, you have to know on what people will you do your research. Will you do your research on medical students? Will you do your research on general people? Will you do your research on women? Will you do your research on diseased people? And you do your research on young people? Will you do your research on old people? Right? That has to be defined by your research question. It has to be framed that way, right? One second. Then then comes that is second, that is the intervention or the type of exposure. Whatever your research question is, it might involve, you giving, you intervening, like in some this will be taught later in the types of studies. There are studies in which known as randomized controlled trials, in which we give certain drugs. We give drugs to one set of people and we do not give drugs to one set of people. So जिनमें हम दे रहे हैं, we are intervening, we are creating an intervention. So yeah, but that is not the only kind of intervention. In some studies, whatever you are doing, if you are educating a patient, yeah, so that also comes under intervention. Or but not all studies have intervention. Some studies are there are two kinds of studies: observational and experimental. So observational studies do not have any kind of intervention. So उसमें we just see कि does our research question define the exposure? Because just whatever research, let's say अगर मैं research question is something related to COVID-19, so that COVID-19 becomes the exposure and it should be defined in my research question. वो अभी आगे चल के when I थोड़ा और clear होगा, I'll tell you. C is comparison or a type of control. Now, whatever we are checking, how do we know that that particular thing is wrong? We compare it with normal. Like if I say my right ear is bigger than my left ear, how do I know that? I have a normal to compare with, and no, my ears are normal. This is just example. So your research question, from your research question, it should be deducible what kind of control you have, or by what are you comparing it with it, or what is your null hypothesis. वो भी don't अभी I will tell you in a few minutes what a null hypothesis is. So this is what we check in comparison. And last is outcome. From your research question, whatever you frame, you should be able to tell what kind of outcome will come. किस टाइप का आउटकम है, क्योंकि every hypothesis लास्ट में yields a result and you should be able to tell किस टाइप का रिजल्ट आएगा, है ना? So this is what a PICO is, and don't worry, PICO can be a bit confusing, but abhi when I'll tell about the examples, you will understand it better. So let's just discuss some examples. So what we'll do is we'll try to frame a hypothesis. जो भी मैंने अभी steps बताए हैं, we'll follow the same steps and we'll try to come up with a hypothesis. So we'll start with a general area of interest. कहाँ से ideas आते हैं? It could be my personal observation, my personal curiosity, my intuitions. So my personal observation was I've seen that the rate of suicides among young people is rising. This was my personal observation. So once I have this broad area of interest, I can start to narrow it down. So it's basic idea say they can be, what are the research questions that are possible? Is same idea say you can go in multiple directions. You can go in any direction. So it could be is this rise in suicide due to the pandemic? Could be totally possible. Is it due to the national policies because of the state of the country we are in? Because you see, whatever I'm doing, I'm just guessing it. This is my question, and what can be? I'm just making some educated guesses. What could be the reason behind it? Then it could it also be due to the education system, which is so toxic? Is it due to the social media, or is it there is some sort of role in the amount of amount of empathy that the society has, and so on and so forth? What you see is from the one idea we can get many We can go in many directions, and whatever direction we choose, our research question will depend on it. In some message, let's say I choose the first one. Okay, is the rising rate of suicide among young people due to the pandemic? है ना? I have chosen to narrow it down in this direction. So this was a question: is the COVID-19 pandemic leading to more suicides among the young people? Now, is from this narrow idea, can we further specify it? Because remember, once we do this, we have to go through the medical literature, and we have to check the research papers. So we have to identify where the gap in knowledge exists. We remember the final criteria. It has to be novel. How will it be novel? You have to it has to fill the lacunae in the existing knowledge. है ना? So we have to focus on things we don't already know. So इसमें भी करेंगे. तो if you have this, is the COVID-19 pandemic leading to more suicides among the young people? So what are the possible इसमें research questions? One is social isolation leading to exacerbation of pre-existing societal thoughts? This could be one reason. Another thing could be uh, इसमें what I'm doing is, from this basic idea, I can form any type of question. So what are the kind of specific questions that are possible? They are not the same questions. सबका सबका मीनिंग डिफरेंट है. सो आई एम जस्ट शोइंग कि डिफरेंट किसी भी डायरेक्शन में जाना पॉसिबल है. सो इसके बाद आता है, आर पीपल हु वर इन्फेक्टेड बाय कोविड-19 एट ग्रेटर रिस्क ऑफ कमिटिंग सुसाइड? मे बी आई सस्पेक्ट इट, हो सकता है ऐसा. Or it could be, is the uncertainty of future due to COVID-19 contributing to increased suicide rate among the young people, etc. So it could be money. So let's say I choose to go with the first one. Is social isolation leading to exacerbation of suicidal thought? So once we choose a final, narrowed down area after applying the final criteria, because this one, if I choose to do this, is social isolation leading to exacerbation of pre-existing suicidal thoughts? It fits, it is feasible, it's interesting, it's novel, I've said, it's ethical, and it's relevant. So once I have this, I have to further evaluate it to make it very specific. So इसके लिए we apply the PICO criteria. What was PICO criteria? Population, intervention, control, outcome. So population में हम किस पे करेंगे? It is the young people who have suicidal thoughts. We are not doing it on people who did not have suicidal thoughts before the pandemic. We have to see, and this is stated in the hypothesis, like in the research question. See, in the action of pre-existing suicidal thoughts, it's already there. So it is fulfilling the population criteria, because इस research से मुझे पता, इस question से मुझे पता चल रहा है कि on what people I want to do this research on. Second is intervention or exposure. जिन लोगों पे मैं कर रहा हूँ, what is different in them than other people? What exactly makes them suitable for my research? What makes them suitable is they are people who are facing social isolation. This is the exposure that is leading to certain outcomes. Then comes the C, or the control group. मैं ये result किससे compare कर रहा हूँ? So I am comparing this among the young people who did not have pre-existing suicidal thoughts, because I am suspecting कि is social isolation leading to exacerbation of pre-existing suicidal thoughts. So अगर rate बड़ा है, तो how will I know कि rate बड़ा है? I have to compare it with people who did not have pre-existing suicidal thoughts, and that is conveyed by my research question. And last is outcome. Can my research question tell कि what मेरा result क्या बताएगा? So my result will tell the proportion of young people with increased suicidal thoughts during this pandemic. So it does this is conveyed by a social isolation leading to exacerbation of suicidal thoughts. So obviously इससे जो भी result आएगा, that will tell about this. So once you have applied the PICO criteria, फिर last step है, you have to just refine it. Like something we say, you have to apply the final touches. So this is what this step is. You have to just, like हमारा question था, is social isolation leading to this? So how can we define this? So I will not, now this time I will not change the meaning of the question. The basic gist of the question will stay the same. I will just play with the words. I will use very crisp words, and I will try to uh, you know uh, make this research question as short as possible, but which conveys all the information and has very crisp scientific words. Let's see. Same cheese. Does social isolation contribute to exacerbation of pre-existing societal thoughts in young people? A cross-sectional study. Now, what is the cross-sectional study? ये अभी का टॉपिक नहीं है, मतलब बात लेक्चर्स में what are the types of studies उसमें बताया जाएगा. So the same question has been now defined into a proper question. And again, this question fulfills the PICO criteria. I can tell the population from it, I can tell the intervention from it, I can tell the control group, I can tell the outcome from it. Let's have another example. Like, let's say हमने ब्रॉड एरिया से स्टार्ट किया, फिर हमने उसे नैरो डाउन किया, हमने फिर लिटरेचर रिव्यू किया, लिटरेचर रिव्यू करने के बाद हमने फाइनल क्राइटेरिया लगाया, देन पीको लगाया. सो ultimately we are left with, does recovery of smell in COVID-19 patients have any prognostic value? क्योंकि इसमें there are a few first years. Prognosis is the outcome of a disease. मतलब after you get a disease, तो disease के बाद will you have a positive outcome or will you have a negative outcome? That is prognosis. So does recovery of smell in COVID-19 patient have any prognostic value? This was my narrowed down idea. Let's refine it. So when I refined it, I have used very crisp words. Evaluation of time of recovery of smell in COVID-19 positive patients as a prognostic indicator for those with mild to moderate disease, a prospective multi-center study. Now see how I made everything very specific. यहाँ पे I had just mentioned COVID-19, but COVID-19 में there are variety of cases. But यहाँ पे I specifically mentioned ये only mild to moderate disease में I want to see. And I've also specified the type of study I'll be doing. It's a prospective study. Again, this is इसका टॉपिक नहीं, वो टाइप्स ऑफ स्टडीज का टॉपिक है जो बाद में पढ़ाया जाएगा. So this is what basically define looks like, and with this I can define the PICO. मेरी population क्या है? COVID-19 positive patient with mild to moderate disease. Intervention या exposure क्या है इसमें? Recovery of smell. Control या null hypothesis जो कि I'll tell in a few minutes is कि नो प्रोग्नोस्टिक वैल्यू इज द कंट्रोल. या तो प्रोग्नोस्टिक वैल्यू होगी या तो नहीं होगी, दैट इज द कंट्रोल. एंड आउटकम क्या है? इट विल वी कैन मेजर इज इट अ प्रोग्नोस्टिक इंडिकेटर और नॉट. सो that is with that we are that is the that is how we actually formulate a hypothesis. So this was it. But once you actually have the hypothesis, एक फाइनल हाइपोथेसिस होगी, तो यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड कि जो भी आपने हाइपोथेसिस बनाई है, what kind of hypothesis is it, है ना, किस टाइप की hypothesis है. And this is a theoretical topic. मतलब this is not required to form a hypothesis, but मैंने बताया था कि you have to test hypothesis, and इसकी नॉलेज की आपकी hypothesis किस टाइप की है, that will help you further बाद में in testing the hypothesis, ना. और टेस्ट कैसे करते हैं वो बाकी लेक्चर्स का टॉपिक है, इसका नहीं है. So what are the different kinds of types of hypothesis? There is a descriptive hypothesis. It could be a relational hypothesis. It could be a null hypothesis, जो मैंने अभी बात की, or it could be a alternate hypothesis. So let's one by one. Let's discuss all of it. So what is the descriptive hypothesis? It's simply नाम नहीं है. It describes. What does it describe? It describes the distribution of a variable. It describes about a variable. What is a variable? Variable could be anything. It could be an object, person, organization, situation, event, disease. In simple words, whatever hypothesis you have made, जिस चीज के बारे में है, if your hypothesis is simply giving a statement कि मान लो मेरा तुम्हारा किसी x चीज में किसी substance A में interest है तुम्हारा, so that substance A is your variable, and if you simply your hypothesis is simply describing substance A, so it's a descriptive hypothesis. For example, let's just say मैंने ऐसे statement ले लिया, high incidence of decreased self-esteem among medical students. This is a hypothesis. You ended up with this hypothesis, and see, it is simply describing कि among the medical students, there is a high incidence of decreased self-esteem. So it's no, it's simply describing. It's a descriptive hypothesis. है ना? Next we come to it could be a relational hypothesis. मतलब everything is in the name. It describes the relationship between two or more variables, right? Whatever you have, जो भी hypothesis आपने frame किया है, it might have more than one variable, right? So this kind of hypothesis will tell कि इन दोनों में कोई relation है कि नहीं, and it could either be non-directional or directional. Non-directional मतलब like I two or more variable, you know. These variables, if they are interdependent, uh, the dependent variable, the dependent variable might be positively affected by the independent variable, might be negatively affected by the independent variable. तो अगर positively affect हो रहा है, that is a direction, है ना? It is affected in a positive direction, and या फिर in a negative direction. Like, if a direction exists, that is directional. And agar if there no claim has been made about the direction of the relation, मतलब like example देखो उससे समझ में आ जाएगा. अगर मैं नॉन डायरेक्शनल एग्जांपल दूं, सेम आई हैव यूज्ड द सेम टॉपिक ये एग्जांपल देने के लिए ताकि यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड डिफरेंस. लाइक इंसिडेंस ऑफ डिक्रीज सेल्फ एस्टीम अमंग मेडिकल स्टूडेंट्स. इसमें इट्स ये ये हाइपोथेसिस क्या क्लेम कर रही है कि एक देयर इज अ रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन डिक्रीज सेल्फ एस्टीम और मेडिकल स्टूडेंट्स. इन दो चीजों में रिलेशन है, बट इट डज नॉट टेल कि पॉजिटिव डायरेक्शन में रिलेशन है या नेगेटिव डायरेक्शन में. कि मतलब अगर मेडिकल स्टूडेंट्स में सेल्फ डिक्रीज सेल्फ एस्टीम ज्यादा होता है या कम होता है, इट हैज मेड नो क्लेम अबाउट इट. इट हैज जस्ट सेड कि हाँ देयर इज अ रिलेशनशिप. तो दिस इज नॉन डायरेक्शनल, देयर वाज नो डायरेक्शन. डायरेक्शनल में सेम चीज अगर उसको इस तरीके से कहा जाए, हाई इंसिडेंस ऑफ डिक्रीज सेल्फ एस्टीम अमंग मेडिकल स्टूडेंट्स. नाउ एक तो उसने रिलेशनशिप बताया है कि मेडिकल स्टूडेंट्स और डिक्रीज सेल्फ एस्टीम में देयर इज अ रिलेशनशिप, बट इट इज ऑल्सो गिवन इन अ डायरेक्शन हाई, है ना, यानी पॉजिटिव. इट हैज मतलब कि देयर इज अ पॉजिटिव डायरेक्शन दैट एग्जिस्ट कि मेडिकल स्टूडेंट, इफ यू आर अ मेडिकल स्टूडेंट्स, you have a greater chances of having decreased self-esteem. So since there is a direction that exists, it is directional. अगर ये low incidence होता तो भी ये directional होता, because a direction exists. Next, relationship hypothesis could also be correlational or explanatory. Again जो types हैं सब कुछ इसके नाम में है. Correlational, it is it correlation is कि just a relation, जो two variables हैं, the
Hello.
relationship. हाँ हाँ बताओ.
Excuse me, sir.
हाँ बताओ बताओ बताओ.
So the same kind of hypothesis can be relational and descriptive.
हाँ 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 हाँ, ये जो टाइप्स ऑफ
Like
हाइपोथेसिस हैं.
you have used the incident. हाँ, तो आपने जो incidence of self-esteem among the middle students आपने use किया है. ये
हम्म
relational भी है, मतलब ये relational के example में भी आ रहा है और description के example में भी आ रहा है.
हम्म.
That means the hypothesis can be relational and descriptive at the same time, right?
हाँ हाँ, वही मैं जितने भी टाइप्स बता रहा हूँ, ये दीज टाइप्स
हाँ
जस्ट कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ हाइपर, मतलब ये देख मतलब लाइक इफ आई डिस्क्राइब माई सेल्फ, आई आई हैव अ हाइट, आई हैव अ वेट, है ना. तो बट व्हाट आर हाइट एंड वेट, दीज आर क्या कहते हैं, एंथ्रोपोलॉजिकल मेजरमेंट्स. तो इसी तरह जो टाइप्स ऑफ हाइपोथेसिस हैं, a same hypothesis different कैटेगरी में फॉल कर सकती है. इट्स जस्ट मतलब इस सॉर्ट ऑफ ये जो टाइप्स हैं, ये एक हाइपोथेसिस की कैरेक्टरिस्टिक है कि एक हाइपोथेसिस डिस्क्रिप्टिव भी हो सकता है, साथ में रिलेशनल
okay
भी
okay
हो.
okay
हाँ
so these are the characteristic of hypothesis.
हाँ, मतलब ऐसे टाइप्स हैं,
Okay
लेकिन ये एक ही हाइपोथेसिस मल्टीपल भी हो सकता है ना. सेम लाइक ये हाई इंसिडेंस वाला, इट्स अ डायरेक्शनल रिलेशनल,
okay
और इट्स
it
आल्सो
may
अ
have that
डिस्क्रिप्टिव.
character it
हम्म
okay it may have that
हम्म
character or may not.
हम्म.
Okay.
ठीक. तो हाँ, तो आई वाज ऑन की रिलेशनल हाइपोथेसिस को रिलेशन भी हो सकता है, एक्सप्लेनेटरी भी हो सकता है. लाइक टू वेरिएबल्स में देयर अ रिलेशनशिप एग्जिस्ट, बट द हाइपोथेसिस मेक्स नो क्लेम कि वन वेरिएबल इज द रीजन फॉर द चेंज इन अनदर वेरिएबल. लाइक यू विल अंडरस्टैंड जब मैं एक्सप्लेनेटरी बताऊंगा. तो एक्सप्लेनेटरी में क्या मतलब है इसमें भी देर आर टू वेरिएबल्स, बट इसमें वन द हाइपोथेसिस क्लेम्स कि द चेंज इन वन वेरिएबल इज अफेक्टेड बाय द अनदर वेरिएबल. जैसे like if मैं correlation का example लूं, and again same time low self esteem is associated with being a medical student. Now it has defined a relationship कि self esteem और medical student में एक relationship है, but it has made no claim कि medical student होना ही लो सेल्फ एस्टीम कॉज करता है ना. इस स्टेटमेंट में देयर इज नो क्लेम अबाउट दैट, सिंपली एक रिलेशनशिप दे दिया है. और इट कुड बी एक्सप्लेनेटरी, जैसे अगर इट्स सेइंग कि एनरोलिंग इन अ मेडिकल कॉलेज इज अ रिस्क फैक्टर फॉर लो एस्टीम. अब देखो इसमें इट्स मेकिंग अ क्लेम कि इफ यू विल एनरोल इन अ मेडिकल कॉलेज that is a risk factor for low self-esteem. It has given an explanation, है ना, कि enrolling, it has explained the low self-esteem by enrolling in a medical college. Since it was explained, तो ये explanatory में आता है, right? And again, it could, ये same hypothesis multiple हो सकती है. So third type आता है वो null hypothesis of डिस्क्रिप्टिव और रिलेशनल, मोस्टली थ्योरेटिकल है. नल मतलब उसका कोई प्रैक्टिकल यूज नहीं आता है, ये मतलब ये सब एक नॉलेज के लिए है. नल हाइपोथेसिस को जानना इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट बिकॉज व्हेन यू विल टेस्ट अ हाइपोथेसिस, नल हाइपोथेसिस हैज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल. हाउ डू वी टेस्ट कैसे करते हैं वो बात का लेक्चर है, बट यू हैव टू नो कि नोइंग अ नल हाइपोथेसिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट. तो अ हाइपोथेसिस, हेलो, हाँ रूम पे हूँ. अच्छा, वन सेकेंड. मैं जस्ट 1 मिनट में आया, मेरे नेबर का दरवाजा किसने बाहर से बंद कर दिया है. 1 सेकेंड. आई एम बिजी अभी, बाद में मैं भी कॉल पे हूँ, बाद में बात करूँ. हाँ हेलो, सॉरी फॉर द डिस्टर्बेंस. सब लोग हो ना आप? हेलो हेलो हेलो, आवाज आ रही है मेरी? हेलो.
Yes, yes,
हाँ
sorry.
हाँ, ठीक ठीक है. सो अ नल हाइपोथेसिस बेसिकली हाइपोथेसिस that proposes that there is no relationship between the two variables, that the difference was by chance and does not exist in reality. So जो एक पहली बात तो जो भी हाइपोथेसिस आप बनाओगे, यू डू नॉट फ्रेम अ नल हाइपोथेसिस, है ना. नल हाइपोथेसिस बाद में आता है. लाइक जो भी आपने हाइपोथेसिस बनाया है ना, इट्स बेसिकली द ऑपोजिट ऑफ दैट. योर हाइपोथेसिस, अब तक जैसे योर हाइपोथेसिस स्टेट्स कि हाँ, आई सस्पेक्ट देयर माइट बी अ रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन दिस एंड दैट. यूजुअली हाइपोथेसिस लाइक दैट. एंड null hypothesis is basically just the opposite of it. It proposes that there is no relationship between the two variables. Like, so it's basically a statement that denies a working hypothesis, and it is not denoted as H naught. So, working hypothesis is why जो भी आप hypothesis बनाए, it could be a descriptive hypothesis, it could be relation hypothesis, जो भी आप hypothesis आई है आपके पास, that is your working hypothesis. And you begin your research with that. You do not frame a null hypothesis, but जब you when you are testing your hypothesis, ये बाद का आएगा, मतलब ये बाद में explain किया जाएगा कि how do you test, उसमें null hypothesis क्या role है. जो just खाली अभी के लिए इतना जानो कि जो भी hypothesis बनाया है उसके लिए you have to describe a null hypothesis. क्या कैसे करना होता है? You have a working hypothesis, बस उसका उल्टा बोल दो, है ना, कि if my working hypothesis says कि A and B are related, so my null hypothesis will say that A and B are not related, ना. Because क्योंकि there can be only one truth. या तो ये सच होगा working hypothesis A and B are related, या तो null hypothesis सच होगी कि A and B are not related. This is the concept of null hypothesis. तो अगर इसका example लें, if I'm working hypothesis is enrolling in a medical college is a risk factor for low self-esteem, then what will be my H naught या फिर मेरी null hypothesis? Enrolling in a medical factor is not a risk factor for low self-esteem. Simply इसका opposite. खाली इतना अभी के लिए खाली इतना समझना है. Simply the opposite of your working hypothesis, and इसका use testing में आता है, वो बाद में आएगा, right? So Last we come to alternate hypothesis. Alternate hypothesis, it is basically the working hypothesis. So अगर अगर या तो नल हाइपोथेसिस ट्रू होगा या तो नहीं होगा, नल हाइपोथेसिस अगर गलत है तो व्हाट डज दैट मीन कि अगर देयर इज नो रिलेशनशिप, मतलब इफ द स्टेटमेंट दैट सेज कि देयर इज नो रिलेशनशिप एंड दैट इज फॉल्स, व्हाट डज दैट मीन? इट इट मींस कि देयर इज सम रिलेशनशिप. सो ऑल अदर permissible relationship refers to alternate hypothesis, है ना. It could be कि they are positively related, it could be कि they are negatively related, it could, है ना. तो जो भी रिलेशनशिप है दैट कम्स अंडर ऑल्टरनेटिव हाइपोथेसिस. मतलब सिंपली it is the hypothesis that is to be accepted when the null hypothesis is rejected. It is denoted as H1. Right? So मतलब null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis, they go hand in hand. You do not describe a null hypothesis, you describe an alternate hypothesis. Alternate hypothesis is the opposite of null hypothesis and vice versa. If you very same example, enrolling in a medical college is a risk factor for lower self-esteem. This is your alternate hypothesis. है ना. या तो ये सच होगा, अगर ये सच है मतलब नल हाइपोथेसिस गलत है, और अगर ये सच है कि इट इज नॉट अ रिस्क फैक्टर, यानी कि ऑल्टरनेट हाइपोथेसिस गलत है. ठीक है. एंड जो भी सही होगा, अगर नल हाइपोथेसिस सच होगा तो वी विल एक्सेप्ट द नल हाइपोथेसिस. अगर ये सच होगा देन वी विल एक्सपेक्ट द accept the alternate hypothesis. Then last part we come to what are the characteristics of a well-formed hypothesis or what is good hypothesis, because that was all about how we form a hypothesis ourselves. Like, what have we learned up till now? हम खुद अपनी hypothesis कैसे बनाएंगे? And if we come across a hypothesis and once we make our own hypothesis, uh, we get to know कि किस type की hypothesis है वो, right? Now last is कि what are the characteristics of a good hypothesis? This should serve as a, you know, uh, as a sort of क्या कहते हैं, a baseline कि you have to, if you know what a good hypothesis is, तो जो भी आप hypothesis बनाओगे you will try to make it in a good way, ना. It ends up as a good hypothesis. Also whatever research paper you read, अब से मतलब अब इससे पहले आई हैड टोल्ड यू कि कैसे रिसर्च पेपर पढ़ना है, बट फ्रॉम नाउ ऑन वट एवर रिसर्च पेपर यू रीड, फोकस ऑन द हाइपोथेसिस पार्ट. इसको डिवाइड इट ना, इसको एनालाइज इट बाय फाइनर, एनालाइज इट बाय पीको, and analyze it by the points that I will tell you now. Like first, it should be adequate for the purpose. Whatever you want to do, does your hypothesis tell that? It has to be adequate for the purpose. It should address the original problem. Now, with the research question you had in mind, because once you, in the process of forming hypothesis, you must have seen we have to edit it many times. You have to, जब हम narrow करते हैं तब edit करना पड़ता है. When you apply the final criteria, we have to edit. When you apply the PICO criteria, then we have to edit. तो but ऐसा ना हो कि edit करते करते it deviates from the original problem. So focus it should address on the original problem. Then it clearly identifies the variables relevant in the study. है ना. तो ये सब डिस्क्रिप अभी जो हमें टाइप्स ऑफ हाइपोथेसिस थी, तो how were we able to identify कि descriptive थी या फिर relational थी? Because those hypotheses had clearly defined the variables that were involved in the study. And this, it should help in knowing the research design. Remember my जब मैं I was telling you how to refine a question in a proper crisp format. तो उसमें last में there was a cross-sectional study, a multi-centric prospective study. What was that? It was, it was helping others know the research design just by reading my hypothesis. उसको methodology नहीं पढ़नी पड़ेगी, सिर्फ मेरे hypothesis से the person can know कि वो prospective study थी, retrospective study थी, cross-sectional study थी, observational थी, experimental थी, क्या थी. तो and don't worry कि ये सब terms नहीं पता, ये this is a separate lecture, है ना. तो you will get to know that. Then this is very important, testable. Remember जो Richard Feynman वाला, है ना, if it agrees with the hypothesis, if it agrees with the result, it's correct. If it does not, it is not correct. So it has to be testable. मतलब so testable कैसे होगा? Whatever techniques that are required to test your hypothesis, it should, those techniques should be available and those techniques should be acceptable. Available, like मेरे कोई like if it take cancer only, and it requires uh, some really really क्या कहते हैं हाई स्टैंडर्ड डायग्नोस्टिक मोडालिटी जो आपके इंस्टीट्यूशन में अवेलेबल नहीं है, नो पॉइंट इन डूइंग इट। एंड एक्सेप्टेबल टेक्निक लाइक प्रोस्टेट कैंसर के लिए पर रेक्टल एग्जामिनेशन दैट and your study needs that. So that is a very embarrassing examination. Not everyone will agree to it. So that does not come under acceptable technique. So try to frame a hypothesis that involves acceptable techniques. Then explanation can be given from theoretical framework. It should be kind of hypothesis for which you have some sort of background knowledge, for which background information exists. You can there is some sort of that मतलब it's a simply वो हवा में बात नहीं होनी चाहिए. It should be something that you can explain logically, है ना. It should be it should be something logical. Or last but not the least, it should be simple and not too complex. Like your goal should be whatever you are framing, it should be in the least possible words, in the crispest word, most crisp words, and it should involve scientific crisp words in the it should be simple, not very complex. There are if it could be कि we we decide to include all sort of information hypothesis में सब कुछ hypothesis में बता करते हैं. No, hypothesis has to be of limited words and simple, not too complex. So that is pretty much it. No, so thank you so much. कोई question so to please tell, because since you might be hearing about it for first time, so questions होंगे. Or also before you ask questions, I just want to say after the session start framing your own hypothesis, because there's a reason you became a part of the society. You must be interested in research, right? So जिस भी चीज जो भी करने का मन है, follow the same. I will share the presentation. Start with a broad idea, apply the final criteria, and apply PICO, then come up with your own question. When you come up with your own hypothesis, I either put it on the group or send it on to me on personal message, जो भी prefer करते हो, and then we'll evaluate is it a good hypothesis or not. And this is a मतलब वैसे तो काफी कम लोगों ने अटेंड किया इस लेक्चर को, but this was important because if you know how to form a good hypothesis, तो इसके बाद all you have to do is approach a faculty, because उसके बाद जो भी हेल्प चाहिए, जो भी रिक्वायरमेंट्स होंगी, वो उसमें आपकी फैकल्टी हेल्प कर सकती है. बट one of the biggest task is coming up with a good idea. फैकल्टी वहां पे सपोर्टिव नहीं होती है. ये आइडिया दे वांट कि आप किसी अच्छे आइडिया के साथ आओ, एंड उसके बाद जितनी हेल्प होगी दे विल डू इट. सो इसलिए ट्राई मेकिंग क्वेश्चन. सिर्फ एक नहीं, यू कैन हैव मल्टीपल. लाइक मेरे पास एक डायरी है, लाइक आई हैव दिस डायरी, और मुझको जब जो आइडिया आता है आई राइट इट डाउन इसमें, एंड इट हैज मल्टीपल आइडियाज. तो थिंग इज कि फिर जो भी फिजिबल होगा, I can just simply choose from that and choose to do it. So you can try that. So any questions? Anyone? Stop sharing. लोग तो 10 लोग. Any questions किसी पास? सब समझ में आ गया? मतलब तो सब समझ में आ गया? Unmute कर लो सब लोग. सब. Were you able to understand everyone?
Yes, boss.
चलो ठीक है, अच्छी बात है. और अगर अभी क्वेश्चन नहीं पूछ रहे तो यू कैन ऑलवेज मैसेज मी. कभी जो भी डाउट हो मैसेज में, कोई दिक्कत नहीं, तो मैं वहाँ पे एक्सप्लेन कर दूंगा. ठीक है. थैंक यू सो मच अपना टाइम देने के लिए. सो यू कैन लीव नाउ.
थैंक यू सर.
एंड प्लीज क्वेश्चन है ना, अगर मुझसे नहीं पूछना है तो गूगल कर लेना. गूगल पे देर आर अनलिमिटेड रिसोर्सेज. जो समझ में ना आए सिंपली गूगल इट. बाकी वो थर्ड ईयर में भी पढ़ाया जाएगा, लेकिन मतलब बी इंक्विजिटिव. चलो बाय बाय.